I actually did puzzle last night about, God, what can I say about the Rules Committee right now, let alone the state of Congress. And I thought I would start with Congress, go to Rules, quickly look where we're at in the head, and then just throw it open for questions. So let's start with Congress. It's the most unusual Congress in American history. I mean that in all sincerity. You have to remember, this started with something that we had not done in 100 years, multiple speaker ballot votes, 100 years. And if you look at the length of time and the number of votes, you got to go back to 1856, pre-Civil War, to find anything remotely comparable. We get into that, and then less than a year into it, we do something that we have never done in the history of the United States House of Representatives. We vacate the chair. The institution's 234 years old. That had never been done, and we were without a speaker for 3 weeks. You look at our membership, pretty new majority, but it wasn't like forever ago. This is not, 1995. We're not looking back 40 years. So, but 50% of our members have never served in majority until this Congress. 50% of the Congress. I'm not surprised we're seeing unusual things for that alone. And we're also operating, looking at the Senate and House, in the most narrow majority that anybody's had since 1884, so beyond living memory. It's a majority that, through circumstance, Bill Johnson's going to be the president. Obviously, McCarthy is doing other things right now, although very deeply engaged in what's going on here. Lost a special election, so you're in a dwindling majority that was already pretty small to begin with. And you have a speaker that is, a new speaker. And he's been here since 2015. And most speakers, when they become speaker, have been committee chairman or other leadership positions, and they walk in with a huge staff and team that has been built up over decades, both their direct staff and then their indirect support system built up through the town. That's something obviously a speaker didn't have. And yet I would also tell you, he's the only, and I mean the only, person I think that could have gotten 220 Republican votes, every single Republican vote. Absent Mike Johnson, you are looking at a coalition speaker a matter of 100 and some odd days ago. And anybody that thinks that's a good idea, because a lot of people fantasize it, oh my gosh, this will be the reign of the Senate, it's a terrible idea. Because whoever is speaker in a situation like that is living with the sword of Damocles over their head, where the minority leader can literally destroy them in a 24-hour period. We don't have that. We may have a lot of chaos or whatever, but I would tell you, number one, Mike Johnson's a lot more secure than most people believe. And he's secure for a couple of reasons. Matter of fact, probably should be careful with this. I know you guys don't have your press here, but I also know you record these things, because I went back and listened to my last one. I said, but Matt Gaetz did have my favorite line of Mike Johnson's ascension. I happened to catch it in one of the Hill papers, but he said, gosh, even I don't know 5 guys that don't like Mike Johnson. Likability is a big deal. And he is somebody that everybody genuinely likes as a person. And he's somebody that everybody genuinely trusts as a political leader. So those two commodities in small group politics are worth a lot more than most people think. And Mike has them in abundance. The second thing is, once you do this once, you can kill the king once and say you struck down a tyrant. If you do it a second time, you're probably an assassin. So, the people that did this once, I think, have a hard time doing this. And, frankly, everybody knows if you do this, you will not only go through the turmoil that we went through for 3 weeks, and it was turmoil and a very difficult thing, you'll probably introduce a coalition speaker. The next speaker is not going to be further to the right than Mike Johnson. It's going to come back, and it'll involve Democrats. And I don't think anybody wants to be guilty of that. So in my estimation, he's actually in a stronger position that numerically you could look at it. And all these things you hear about, oh my gosh, if he does this or that, there'll be a motion to vacate. I don't think it's going to go very far. And if the motion to vacate, honestly, is something because we're bringing a bipartisan bill to the floor that a partisan, part of our very partisan right doesn't enjoy, well, I don't think the Democrats are likely to participate. I mean, in the way that they did against Kevin McCarthy. So again, I think the Speaker's the Speaker. He's going to be a Speaker the rest of the term. He's in a stronger position than most people think. But the Congress is an unusual and unpredictable Congress. And it's not, there's no, usually when you look at these things, you look at history, so that gives you some gauge. Since there's no precedent for doing what we did when McCarthy was removed, anybody that thinks this is predictable path going forward is probably wrong. I mean, you can calculate probabilities or whatever, but you have no model, no historical case to look back on and say, oh, this is kind of how it works, and this is at least some sense of what's going. So the Congress is on very unusual and shaky ground in a very, it's very divided, it's very close, it's a very, polarized and challenging environment in front of us for the balance of the political year. In terms of the Rules Committee, I told Nick and I were at a gathering last night, and I said, well, this is a big day for me. I'm now the losingest, Rules Committee chairman of all time. I was tied at 5, but I've gotten to 6 yesterday, so I now, Brady had 6 Super Bowls. I lost 6 rules. It's kind of complicated. But we've had an unusual Rules Committee, and it was set up to be unusual from the beginning. We don't lose in Rules Committee. And that's something that when you read the press is commonly misunderstood. I have some great members there. And as I told you the last time we talked about rules, one of the things McCarthy did, and it's still McCarthy's Rules Committee in a sense, it's still the same players. He wanted to bring in different voices, had different points of view, and he certainly did that. I mean, normally this is a committee staffed by loyalists to the Speaker. We have people that voted against the Speaker multiple times. We have people that have voted for rules the night before and voted against them the next day on the floor. Usually for something totally unrelated to the rule and totally unrelated to the legislation we were considering, just to make a point about something. All that said, we've never lost in Rules Committee. I have a lot of, my core original 4, which is myself, Burgess, Guy Reschenthaler, and Michelle Fischbach, were there in the minority. Those people, if they're with you in the tough times, are going to be with you in the majority. And then we got Nick and Aaron Houchin anchoring the other end, and I would consider them really great members and frankly very traditional Rules Committee members, team players. In between, I've got 3 different members, and I don't say anything bad about any of them. And honestly, I regard these people all as my friends. The one I would point to, which I mentioned the last time we talked, and I would just say this, I was spectacularly right. Thomas Massey has really emerged as a really critical player on the Rules Committee, and a really good player. Thomas, who I've gotten to know a lot more, obviously, in this capacity than I knew before him, because we never served on the same committee. But I call him the conscience of the Rules Committee, and I really mean that when I say that, because his deal is pretty simple. We want this committee to keep the commitments our leadership and it made to our own members. And if you do that, I will vote for the rule, even if I'm going to vote against the bill, which is certainly fine, and nothing wrong with people exercising their deal. But Matthew's deal is you got to keep the 72-hour rule. You cannot, give us a 1,000-page bill in 12 hours to digest it. Give us the 72 hours. You've got to be generous with amendments, particularly if they're cutting spending, even if you don't think they'll pass. Those are all, and we've done all those things. We've done no self-executing rules and things like that. We have played by the rules, and in return, nationally have played by the rules. So we've had a couple of harrowing 7-6 votes in Rules Committee, where it's usually 9-4, but we've never lost, and I've never worried we would lose on the committee. Where the breakdown is on the floor, which is not actually the Rules Committee's responsibility. But we have people that have decided, and I think they're maybe now beginning to regret, that I don't have to vote for the rule. And you can do what you want on the bill. I don't have any problem with that. If you don't vote for the rule, you break down order and you turn over control temporarily to the minority, effectively. You open the door for them to play games. And plus, once you do it, other people, oh, that's how this is played. So this is not just a part of the Freedom Caucus. And I want to stress, part, not all the Freedom Caucus engages in this. But I would go back, people talk a lot about the 8 when we lost McCarthy, and to me that was just an unforgivable sin and put us on the current road that we're on. But I'd go back to the 21, that put us through multiple ballots, and with the best of intentions in the world. But if you're part of a Republican conference and 86% say this guy is going to be our speaker, and you can't go to the floor and vote for that guy without extracting concessions from him and putting the body, then you need to rethink being on that team, because that's just not the way this game can work. And the concessions that were extracted, I would say, laid the groundwork for a lot of the problems we've had the last year. The motion to vacate being one of them, obviously. But beyond that, an approach deal, I say this is an appropriator, and I told our leadership there literally the night this was agreed to, this deal ain't going to work. It is not possible to pass these bills at this level. You'll get about 4 to 6 months into this, and you're going to see the wheels come off the wagon, and that's basically what happened. Now, we're in a new game now, and really within the framework that Kevin McCarthy negotiated, and guess what? It's working. People forget the Fiscal Responsibility Act. I catch the CBO director on television last week. I mean, who interviews the CBO director on Sunday morning? But somebody did. So it was great stuff. And he said, we've actually lowered our budget projection deficits for next year by $400 billion. Still going to be way too much, 1.6 trillion, but it's not going to be the 2 trillion we estimated. And over the 10-year budget window, we've lowered the budget deficit projection by $2.6 trillion. Why? Because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that Kevin McCarthy negotiated. So he did exactly what he said he was going to do. I'm going to negotiate a deal. We're going to gradually bring down spending. And part of our problem is our ambition is greater than our numbers in this Congress, and doesn't recognize the nature of our system in some way. Look, when you have a majority this small and the other party controls the Senate and the presidency, your accomplishments are mostly going to be negative. That is, you're going to deny the other side. It's a blocking majority. It's not a majority capable of pushing things through the Senate and to the president's desk that the Senate won't accept or the majority won't accept and the president doesn't want to sign. You can't do that. But by the same token, if this were 3 years ago and we did not have a majority, I can assure you there would be a reconciliation bill like the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. And there would be another reconciliation bill this year like the $700 billion much misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. And there would be on every appropriations bill something like the infrastructure bill, which you can support or not support, but it's the first major infrastructure bill not totally, but unpaid for. I voted for 2 during the Obama administration, 1 during the Bush administration. So I'm not adverse to voting for Democratic bills, but they were all paid for by the fees, the gas taxes, all that stuff. The last one wasn't. That's why a lot of people didn't vote for it. So we spent in the last 2 years before this majority, $3 trillion outside the normal appropriations process in these 2 reconciliation bills and marked up appropriations. To give you some idea of the scope, the discretionary budget of the United States is $1.6 trillion a year. So this is like having 2, deals on top of the 2 that you're going to do anyway. So we doubled domestic spending in a 2-year period. That is not happening now. That is an accomplishment of this majority, which it never takes credit for and always berates itself for not being able to do more. And I would actually just shutting the door on that pushing things back through some semblance of regular order and being tough is actually an enormous fiscal victory, and the numbers now suggest much bigger probably than people realize. To give you a sense, if the Fiscal Responsibility Act really saves $2.6 trillion over a decade, again, this could change because Congress does things, they have to recalculate. But if it did that, it would save more money than the Budget Control Act, which is Boehner's crown jewel, actually saved, which was about $2 trillion over a 10-year period, which we did do. We actually, the appropriators live within the numbers they were given. And if you look at fiscal 2010 and compare it with fiscal 2019, the beginning of Republican control to the end in the House, we spent less money on defense in 2019 than we did in 2010, and we spent less money on non-defense in 2019 than we did in 2010. The problem, and I say this with much respect to my friends on Ways and Means in E&C, is we're not where the money's at. They are. And in a 10-year period, they did absolutely nothing to rein in entitlement spending and mandatory spending. And until they do, Hal Rogers is the longest-serving guy in the House. When he arrived here in 1981, the Appropriations Committee controlled 65% of all federal spending. Today it's 28%. So we're not the problem. The problem is committees of jurisdiction on Ways and Means and E&C have largely not done their job in terms of controlling spending. Now, we can always come up with a great unpaid-for entitlement reform program like Medicare Part D. I'm not critical of that. I voted for it, and I think it was a good program. But the point is, sooner or later, they got to start paying the piper, or they got to reform the system, or some combination of the two. And with all due respect to all the great Ways and Means chairmen I've known, and I've known them all, they always want to cut taxes, but I don't ever hear any of them ever put entitlement reform as a centerpiece of their agenda, Democrat or Republican, and I don't see any of them doing anything on it. And until that happens, the idea that you balance the budget on the back of discretionary spending, particularly given what's happened over the last 20 years or so, or in Hal's case, I guess 43 years, you can't do it. It's just not possible. So, looking ahead, where are we at? We're a political year, and anybody thinks it's going to be a year of great accomplishment doesn't understand politics very much. The further you get in the political year, the more difficult it is to legislate. If you don't think so, ask James Langford when you talk to him about how difficult it is when you have a presidential candidate on the outside opining on what's going in on the inside. And you tell me any non-incumbent presidential candidate, left or right, is ever going to have anything good to say about the Congress of the United States. I mean, you're looking to pick fights when you're in that business, and you want to fight on the smallest, least popular person in the world, and that's us. That's Congress. So pretty easy to do stuff. And honestly, to be fair, Congress ought to be very careful in an election year, simply because we don't know who's going to win. And it's not a matter of just positioning yourself politically. It's also, why make big changes when the American people are getting ready to make a big decision? They're going to decide who controls the Senate. I actually like our chances there. I think it's, with Manchin leaving, it's 50-50 now. I don't see anything we've got in danger, and I certainly see several opportunities out there. The House, probably who wins the presidency wins the House. We can all overthink this. Members like to think what they do is important, and everybody's watching it. You guys are watching it, but my voters aren't watching this. They're mostly watching the presidential campaign. And if they're voting for Donald Trump, which they will in very substantial numbers in my district, they're not voting Democrat down ticket. And if they're voting for Joe Biden, they're not going to look at me and say, but Tom Cole's such a great guy. I think I'll flip over. They're mostly going to be there. So the presidential race is going to determine largely who wins the House. I was looking at Larry Sabato is one of the guys I respect a lot that's in the balls and strikes business of calling these things. Last week he had a nice two-parter on control of the House, and he added up his certains, likely, and leans on both sides. There was 212 Republicans and 203 Democrats. We actually had a little bit of an edge, and 20 pretty pure toss-up races. I think that's probably a pretty good estimate this far out. looking at it. Look, I have a lot of confidence in Richard Hudson, our guys at the NRCC. They've already shown you in the last 2 election cycles, they won seats when the Senate didn't, when it lost seats, when we lost ground in state legislatures. It's a very competent political team at the NRCC. And Mike Johnson's already shown you how good the financial structure is, because everybody was, oh my God, it's the end of the world, Kevin McCarthy's leaving. Money's still coming in. He's out raising, a lot of money for the team. He couldn't ask the speaker, particularly a new speaker, to be doing more than he's done. And our members are stepping up pretty good. I keep an eye on who pays on the dues and who does what, and our guys are in there. So we're going to have the means to win. We've got the technical people. The candidate recruitment is exceptional again. We have a lot of good candidates. One of the legacies of Kevin McCarthy, who I think is the best candidate recruiter of all time. And so I look forward. We'll either win because we win the presidency, or if we lose, it will be very close. And Congress isn't going to look very different than it does today. I mean, control can change, but the numbers are going to be within a pretty narrow band. And frankly, whoever wins has a good chance of losing at the midterm. You've got 2 second-term presidents. That's what you're going to have. In the next election, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, is going to be the second-term, midterm of a presidency. Usually the worst time ever. So I see Congress being in this narrow band for a long time. I will add, as an appropriator, that's both good and bad news for us. It's bad news in terms of just threading the needle. It's pretty good news in that we're the stuff that's going to move, and everybody's going to want to ride, because sooner or later you got to fund the government. And so the Appropriations Committee, I think, in the immediately foreseeable future, is probably going to be even more powerful than it normally is, and it's very underrated, because again, it's a lot of stuff that would not otherwise happen will happen because it gets attached to an appropriations bill one way or the other. With that, let me just end with this, and then I'll throw it open to question. You go through all this, and it can be pretty depressing. Matter of fact, Nick and I smoke a lot of cigars. And by the way, Nick, as soon as this is over, I'm going to have a cigar. And you are welcome to join me. But that room up there, which is now kind of a congressional cigar club, where we have members of both parties that come, because we keep an open humidor and, dare I say it, an open bar. You get a lot of members together from different classes, different committees, across the spectrum, and they're just sitting there talking about their world and their day and what's going on and what they see. It's actually, it's one of the most wonderful posts to get a pulse, particularly on the Republican side, of what's going on. I used to tell this to Boehner, he had to smoke those god-awful cigarettes, and I said, Speaker, you got to quit smoking cigarettes and start smoking cigars. I mean, a cigarette, you can see a 15-year-old kid standing outside in 25-degree weather going like that, and it's over in 3 minutes. A cigar, you got to sit down. I mean, it's going to be about 30, 45 minutes. At the end of it, you're going to have a relationship, and you're going to have learned something. Nobody learns anything over a cigarette. You aren't. He never took me up on that. But I couldn't believe that. And I would tell you, as I listen to members, we have them from all corners of the conference. That's the great thing about Vice. It goes over every line. So there are no people too pure to be there. I have a lot of optimism. I mean, most of the members that are coming for the right reasons. A lot of them are learning their trade sort of as they go along, but they're well motivated. I see the approach process working its way out. We're in the middle of that right now, and I will tell you, we've got 12 different negotiations going on. We've got some deadlines coming up. We'll see how we do. If you leave it to the appropriators, they'll get it done. They'll produce the product. It'll go out. Then people have got to deliver the votes, and that's going to be the hard part on both sides to actually get there, because again, it's going to be a compromised Republican-Democrat product, and everybody's making a calculation in an election year instead of thinking about just getting the right thing done. Having said all that, look, it's the United States of America. It's still the most powerful country in the world. Still provides more opportunity than any place else. It's still the linchpin for global security. The American people, have you been surprised by the economic numbers this year? I have been. It reminds me of the 1990s, watching the internet revolution kick off, and all of a sudden American productivity moving up in the mid-90s. That looks like it's happening to me again, maybe with artificial intelligence, but something's going on when you look at these productivity numbers that we've seen over the last year, and it's independent of government. You know, I always point out too, you know, come from an energy state like me, when a decade ago, 12 years, you looked at oil and gas production in the United States, we're big, we're number 3 in the world. The Saudis and the Russians doing more than us. Now we're number 1, and we are energy independent. And that was all accomplished by the private sector on its own, without a crash government program, without billions of dollars invested. They did it on their own. So, the country looks after itself over time. It does a better job than Washington, but Washington itself isn't irretrievably broken. With that, I'll shut up. If you got any questions, I'd be happy to try.
Great.